AM 630. WMAL.
It's 6:38 on WMAL, where Washington comes to talk. This is Mornings on the Mall with Brian and Larry. Coming up today at 7:05, Mary and Catherine Ham joins us. At 8:05, Senator Rand Paul, and I want to remind you at 8:44, we will take a moment to remember what happened 12 years ago on this, the anniversary of September 11th. I'm Larry O'Connor alongside Brian Wilson.
What the United States of America and the international community is prepared to do about it. Because what happened to those people is not only a violation of international law, it's also a danger to our security.
That was the President of the United States speaking to America about 15 minutes last night. He says that what happened in Syria does have national security implications for the United States. Joining us on the line now is KT Mcfarland, national security analyst for Fox News. You'll be able to see her today at 9 o'clock and again at 1 p.m. on Fox. And she was on set last night with Brett Baer and Charles Krauthammer and General Scales doing the post-speech analysis. Okay, is the President right? Is there a national security interest in us when it comes to the Syrian chemical attacks?
Well, look, there's a national security interest for us for a whole lot of things. The question is it an essential, vital, can't live without it, national security interest for us? And there I'd probably say no. We have an interest in the Middle East, or we have strategic interest in the Middle East, and that's Israel, and that's terrorists, and that's oil. We want to preserve the right of Israel to exist and help them to defend themselves. We don't want terrorists. We want whatever terrorists that are to stay there. And we do want their oil. So unless we change those three strategic interests, which the President isn't even thinking about, then I think that we don't have a strategic interest in Syria. So I don't, and by strategic interest, I mean something that we would be willing to go to war for and die for.
You know, I can't help but think if the President had given the first third of that speech 2 weeks ago, lobbed a couple of missiles, taken out some kind of minor facility inside Syria, that there would have been a little bit of harumphing up on Capitol Hill, but largely this thing would be over.
Yeah, and if he had done it so quickly that Syria didn't have an opportunity to sort of plan their response. But now he's waited so long that anything that he does militarily, Syria has to respond to, because Assad's own credibility at that point will be on the line. But you know, your whole point is a really good one, and it goes back to the whole leading from behind thing. If you're leading from behind, you don't do something like you just described. You sort of wait, you kind of see where the water's flowing, and then you make your decisions. And that's the ultimate problem of not just the Syria thing, but how we've responded to everything in the Middle East. You know, we were for Mubarak, then we were against him. Then we were for Morsi, we were against him. Then we were supporting the generals, but now we're kind of not sure that we're supporting them. And for Syria, you know, Assad has to go. That was 2 years ago. Then there's a red line. But now it turns out the red line isn't our red line. It's Congress's red line, or it's the world's red line. And now, well, Russia's made a decision. Russia's going to try to help us out of this one. The problem with all of this is that it turns out leading from behind has consequences, and it creates a vacuum up front. And Russia has rushed in to fill that vacuum. And I look not just at today's headlines, but I think for the next 30 years we are going to have violence in the Middle East where it's radical Shiites versus radical Sunnis fueled by Arab oil money on both sides. And it's going to go from country to country to country. It's going to deal with Iran getting nuclear weapons. It's going to deal with potential arms race throughout the Middle East, nuclear arms race throughout the Middle East. And we are not going to be in a position of making a lot of decisions. And that's what upsets me.
Well, and KT Mcfarland, you say that we didn't have a military interest or strategic interest that was worth committing our military. So, I mean, in the long run, the fact is we're not committing our military in any way at this moment. So that's good news. However, it sounds to me like you believe that the way the president went about this, he's really diminished the presidency on an international level and, frankly, diminished American prestige. And Russia has stepped into that void. What are the dangers of that? Especially, I mean, listen, I remember the Carter years. So clearly one election can change and elevate the presidency. All we need is a Ronald Reagan to step in. But between now and then, we're looking at 40 months of this president being very small on the world stage. What are the dangers there?
The dangers, I think the biggest danger is Iran and nuclear weapons. And once that threshold is crossed, the world is a very, very different place. You know, the other stuff you can sort of deal with. But once Iran gets nuclear weapons, then I think it immediately sets off a nuclear arms race as Saudi Arabia, which has all the money in the world, says, well, we're going to get our own nukes. And maybe Turkey does. Maybe the United Arab Emirates have already said they would do so.
Well, maybe Russia will help us with Iran, too. Katie, let me ask you this. Were you surprised, given the context and given the topic last night, were you surprised? Here we are, he gave his speech the day before the anniversary of 9/11, Benghazi, as well as 12 years ago. Were you surprised that he didn't make mention of that to try to contextualize this? And where are we now 12 years after 9/11?
Yeah, I think it was a complete lost effort. First of all, he scheduled the press conference before he knew what events were going to transpire. Now, that's fair enough. Yeah. So I think he either should have delayed the press conference by a night and then done it as an anniversary of September 11th. Because to have it wasn't a press conference, but to have an Oval Office speech, which is a big deal. I mean, I've worked on some for President Reagan. You do that for earth-shattering events. You don't do that to tell people, I'm going to ask you not to vote for something.
Right.
I'm going to ask you to put this all on pause for a while. It
was unbelievable. 3 parts of the speech. First, we should attack. But no, let's talk to 535 people who think they are commander-in-chief and have them come on board and have an opinion. When that didn't work out so well, it's like, we got this oddball idea that the Secretary of State throws out that turns out to be a driving policy, 8 hours later.
And the point I made last night on the Bret Baier panel was by throwing this out publicly to the Russians and saying, we're going to just wait to see what they come up with. It's like when Henry Kissinger in 1972, right before the election, Nixon's re-election, said with regard to the Vietnam peace talks, he said, peace is at hand. We're almost there with the peace agreement of the unpopular Vietnam War. Well, as a result of that, the North Vietnamese said, right, we've got maximum leverage now. And so they stalled on the Vietnam peace accords that were being negotiated in Paris. We had the election, Nixon won re-election, but the only way to get those peace talks to move was Nixon had to bomb North Korea. And then within days, the North Koreans settled. But I hope that Obama hasn't put America in that bind of saying to Russia, well, now everything's up to you. And then Russia decides to really sort of jerk us around. I was very upset this morning when I read the headline in an obscure Russian newspaper that the Russians are now going to give the S-300 missile, it's a state-of-the-art air defense missile, to Iran, because what that means is Iran becomes invulnerable to any kind of Israeli attack and makes any kind of an American military option on Iran's nuclear site.
The Russians are not being good actors on the stage right now, despite the way it looks. They're really not.
They're just playing Obama. They're dancing circles around him.
They're driving the truck. They
are driving the truck, and they don't have to drive the truck. Yeah. Obama could so easily go to the Russians and say, you guys are broke within a decade without American help, and we're not going to give it to you unless you help us.
All right, KT, thank you very much. Really appreciate you joining us. I know you had a late night.
Thank you.